I've been tipping Priti Patel for weeks, if not months, as being the kind of real candidate that nobody's talking about. I think that she is quietly behind the scenes building support. I mean, you wouldn't sort of know it from necessarily looking from the outside, but on the inside, she is very popular.
Right.
She's actually, people describe her as being very kind, very warm, very generous. I think those are attributions that you wouldn't necessarily see people
No.
attributing to some of the other candidates potentially on the right of the party.
Right.
That can be pretty bullish and quite aggressive.
The new leader of the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party, has criticised opponents who, in his words, have sought to score cheap political points after Sir Geoffrey Donaldson's resignation. Sir Geoffrey was charged with historical sex offences, which he says he'll strenuously contest. How much can you tell us about what's going on and what's going to happen?
Really difficult to sort of unpick what's happening at the moment. It's obviously a fast-moving story, not something that anybody had really predicted happening. And lots
is this something that there were whispers this sort of thing might be about to happen, or is this really out of the blue?
Not around Westminster,
Right.
Absolutely not. And you generally do pick up on the kind of rumours before they happen. But no, we didn't hear anything particularly about this. And I think there are generally more questions than answers at the moment. I mean, I think the point about this that the kind of the new leader of the sort of DP is trying to allude to is that they don't want this to unravel the power sharing arrangements, which, as we all know, took so much effort and political capital to actually see Stormont returned fairly recently. And obviously, it was a very difficult set of negotiations given the way in which, Sinn Féin have kind of rocketed up the kind of political agenda in Northern Ireland. And I think the concern is that this now kind of reopens those old wounds around the Northern Ireland Protocol, which were very difficult for the party to overcome, irrespective of the power sharing arrangements with Sinn Féin. So I think that is what is concerning people at the moment. We've heard already from the former Northern Ireland Secretary, Julian Smith, who's trying to kind of calm the waters, as it were, suggesting that he's not at all concerned that this could have any impact on those power sharing arrangements. But obviously, look, there's going to be people that have a kind of dog in the fight, that don't like what's happened. And obviously this is a seismic event, really, in terms of Northern Ireland politics. And, I guess it's worrying people that it could be used as a bit of a political hot potato to sort of reignite the tensions around all of this. So I think it's very much a question of watch this space.
Yeah, all very fragile indeed. As indeed is the situation over here as well in London. Will Rishi Sunak make it to the general election? Allies say there will almost certainly be a confidence vote after the local elections in May. And the latest name in the frame is Priti Patel, who could be brought back. Priti Patel, who everyone loves so much, could come back and be our next Prime Minister. Is this likely? Is this real?
I've been tipping Priti Patel for weeks, if not months, as being the kind of real candidate that nobody's talking about. I think that she is quietly behind the scenes building support. I mean, you wouldn't sort of know it from necessarily looking from the outside, but on the inside, she is very popular.
Right.
She's actually, people describe her as being very kind, very warm, very generous. I think those are attributions that you wouldn't necessarily see people attributing to some of the other candidates potentially on the right of the party.
Right.
That can be pretty bullish and quite aggressive. She's been there for a long time. She's got a kind of broad base of thought. She was Home Secretary, let's not forget that. So she's held high offices of state. But more importantly than that, she has a very powerful ally, which is Boris Johnson.
Of course.
And, Boris Johnson is no longer an MP, but he still does carry huge sway. And, she is somebody that was very, very loyal to him. And I think that there is a possibility that he will feel the need to be very loyal to her. But I think the more wild rumour that I hear is that she has had a rapprochement with Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister.
Really?
They used to not like each other very much. My understanding is now that relations are much warmer. And one of the suggestions that has been put to me is that might they join up as running mates?
What? So what? Liz Truss Chancellor?
Shadow Chancellor. Well,
a shadow. I mean,
she didn't have very long to put her Trussonomics ideas into play. Perhaps she might fare better under the wing of Priti Patel.
Okay. So various questions. The first one being, Priti Patel is this sort of warm. I mean, she did have a fairly major bullying scandal, Priti Patel, which doesn't necessarily exude massive warmth in the popular imagination. More to the point, though, How likely do you think it is that Rishi Sunak will face a leadership challenge after the May elections?
I think it's
Because bear in mind, they'll still be in government then.
Yeah, I think it's looking increasingly likely.
Gosh.
And when you talk to people behind the scenes who, serve on the 1922 committee, I mean, they never know. And, Graham Brady is always the soul of discretion about these matters. But, MPs do talk, they share with each other whether they have put in letters. There is definitely more and more speculation that the number of letters that has gone into the 1922 committee is now ticking up. And that they are thinking that the May the 2nd will be a kind of catalyst moment, particularly if they do as badly as is feared. I mean, the one glimmer of hope that they've always had is that Susan Hall would win City Hall and oust Sadiq Khan. I mean, that's not totally off the realms of possibility. I mean, I still think it's highly unlikely, but given the new electoral changes, the first past the post, and the fact that you now have to produce ID in order to vote, which is something that independent researchers think will have a huge impact on certain groups of people voting. It could come down to a fairly small margin between the two candidates, but I still think it would be fairly unlikely that Susan Hall would win. But look, I think people are fairly despairing. The polls seem to be going in the wrong direction. I think that anything that showed that the party was about to face a kind of an extinction level defeat is going to wind people up, and there are polls all the time coming out which show a more and more depressing picture. And I think it's almost got to a point where, as MPs have said to me, it's now so bad that actually the notion of changing leader again, having a third change of leader since the last election, isn't as unpalatable as perhaps it was even a couple of weeks ago.
Gosh.
Simply because they're looking at their colleagues and they're looking at the numbers, and they can see that just even having a potential bounce with a new leader could make the difference between the number of MPs that they have serving, having a 1 in front of it or a 2 in front of it, as one MP put it to me. So I think, it is when your backs are up against the wall, I think people are looking...
Like, what have we got to lose?
What have we
How
got
much
to
worse
lose?
could it be?
Exactly.
So we've had a WhatsApp while we were talking from Peter. He said, you had me at Priti Patel, but lost me, and Starmer has my vote if Liz Truss is given any role whatsoever. So that's an interesting sort of, dichotomy there.
Well,
maybe.
of course, and you should always bear in mind it's always difficult to kind of work out who is putting forward these notions. I'm not sure that it's necessarily an idea that's coming out of Priti's camp, but it is something that I've heard MPs chattering about in the tea rooms.
Well, that leaves it a complete mystery as to what camp it could have been coming from. If it's Priti and Liz and it's not from Priti's camp, I don't know. No, it's beyond me. Let's talk policy. Suggestion floated this morning that migrant nationalities with the highest rates of crime will be revealed in league tables under new plans. That seems pretty toxic, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was looking at this morning and thinking, I don't quite understand this story, on the basis that the argument being made is that and I believe it was Robert Jenrick that put forward this plan, was that the argument being made is that it would help inform policies around legal migration and illegal migration, but particularly inform decisions about visas, for example, and who can come in and who can't. But one would imagine that the government already has these figures at their fingertips.
Well, if they're going to publish them, you'd think they must have them. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure what publishing them does to advance that argument, other than basically demonising the racial groups that these people come from, given that you would have thought that the information, as we said, was already there, that they could inform decisions that the government make already. So it seems to me just an exercise in kind of bashing immigrants, really.
Well, I mean, unless it's part of a sort of a ongoing plan to sort of isolate various countries where we're going to limit the level of immigration from countries specifically. But
we could do that already.
We could do that already. It doesn't.
Exactly.
It seems like a very sort of incendiary thing to do. Perhaps linked. Downing Street. Downing Street has ruled out any pre-election pact with Nigel Farage, saying we don't do deals. Presumably, there are quite a lot of Conservatives who very much would like a pact with Nigel Farage, because with the sort of looming threat of reform and all that.
Yes, I'm sure there are. And I think that, the more the polling shows that, reform is ticking up, And, there is genuine concern about the two parties crossing places, and Reform polling better than the Tories if their electoral freefall continues. I think there is a lot to be said for MPs wanting a pact with Nigel Farage's Reform Party. However, Richard Tice, the current leader of that organisation, has said very clearly that he's not going to do what the party did back in 2019 when they stood back as the Brexit party for the Conservative Party. They have said that very loudly, very vocally. I mean, you can never quite trust that they won't have a last minute rethink, because they said very similar things ahead of 2019. But I think that is something that, many people are talking about. The question that I think this story begs is whether there have been any genuine attempts to try and persuade Number 10 that actually making Nigel Farage appear, which is what's been suggested, and then
Or
potentially making him ambassador to
Washington.
Washington. I can't imagine that this Downing Street would countenance that in any way.
I mean, I can sort of see, like, in this sort of future scenario where you have Prime Minister Priti Patel
Yes.
and President Donald Trump, then Ambassador Nigel Farage makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, it does.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer, President Joe Biden, Ambassador Nigel Farage, don't really
Makes
see
no
that
sense
working.
at all.
Yeah.
And also this particular, Rishi Sunak. I mean, they've always had the opportunity to invite people like Nigel Farage or Aaron Banks to join the party. As you'll recall, they have always been told they can't join the party, and they have not been allowed to join as members.
Yeah.
I think that that's a line that Rishi Sunak has maintained throughout being the Prime Minister, and I can't see that he would want to do anything at this stage that would undermine what's already happened. So I don't think anything is going to happen on this front anytime soon.
Before I let you go, a lot of interest this morning in Angela Rayner and what's going on with her historic capital gains tax potential woes. What's your feel for that story? Where's it going? How much can you say?
Well, it's not going away. And I think that that's not a position that you want to be in. It's a question that's going to be asked time and time again. I think it's an unusual position for Keir Starmer to say that he hasn't seen the advice that she's been given, but his team have. I think anybody who's pursuing this story is going to try and find out a bit more about exactly what it does say and how grey an area it is. I think the fact that the Greater Manchester Police have said that they're going to review the evidence is of concern. I think if they launch an investigation, it's going to become even more difficult for her to continue to duck those questions. But I think it is just going to be one of those things that is a slow grind until we get some kind of definitive answers, and only she can provide those.
I mean, without sort of innocent unless proven guilty and so on. If how serious a thing would this be if it all turned out to be real, if you see what I mean?
As with all of these stories, I suspect if there'd been a kind of mea culpa moment at the beginning and some kind of, open transparency about exactly what had gone on, I don't think it would have been too big a deal. I think it's very likely that the advice that she was given is not categoric, and there probably are some shades of grey in it. I think the problem is that this has now been going on and rumbling on for so many weeks. There's been so many different statements, etc., etc. And as you know, with a lot of these kind of stories, it's always the denial that does for you in the end. And I think she's in danger of falling into that hole. If I were advising her, I would be saying that she needs to have a kind of, sort of scraping the barnacles of the boat moment and actually come forward and provide, very substantive answers about it to try and make the story go away. But I suspect the truth of it is somewhere that means that it isn't quite as clear-cut as people think, and they're now hoping that it will go away, and so don't want to do that. But I mean, in my experience, these stories have a habit of continuing to haunt you until you kind of take the bull by the horns.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much indeed, Caroline Wheeler. And you can, of course, read more from Caroline in the Sunday Times tomorrow and all other Sundays in the paper or via your digital subscription. Also, check out the Times' exclusive polling today about the quiet Blair seats that hold the key to a Labour majority. That's in the paper. And if you're a digital subscriber to the Times and the Sunday Times, you'll get access to a whole range of daily newsletters. The business newsletter has all the latest financial and economic news twice a day, right through the week, and an extra briefing on a Sunday. You can get all of this if you head to the My Account section of the Times website. The TV review is, of course, to come after 11:30, but next up on the programme, startling scenes from